chronology of events from Ol'ginskaya, where the residents themselves found the kidnapper of the murdered second grader. The suspect and his house had to be guarded from the enraged villagers. On the evening of May 17th, in the village of Ol'ginskaya, a second grader named Dasha name changed. Ed. Note went to the store and did not return. And a few hours later, the girl's body was found in a nearby strip of forest. A tow truck driver, living in the neighboring settlement of Dorozhny, confessed to the murder. Correspondent Alexandra Shevchenko reconstructed the events of the first hours of the tragedy and tells how Ol'ginskaya lives now. Did not return from the Pyatarokshka around 4 p.m., Olga Sharnikova's neighbor, Vasily, came looking for his 8-year-old daughter. "Is Dasha with you?" the man asked. "No, we haven't seen her," Olga replied. An hour before that, Vasily had brought Dasha home from school while Anna, Vasily's wife and Dasha's mother, was at work. The father and daughter sat down to have lunch. Dasha wanted some treats, and she asked to go to the store. Her father let her go and never saw his daughter alive again. After leaving the Sharnikovs, Vasily picked up his wife from work, and together with relatives and friends, they began to look for the child. They still thought then maybe she went to one of her friends. By that time they already knew Dasha had been in the Pyatarokshka, bought some treats and left. "We immediately started looking with Anya, the girl's mother," says the owner of the pharmacy, Tatiana Zubko. "At first we didn't pay attention to the tow truck, but then when we saw how Dasha walked and it followed her." The cameras captured how at 15:32, a tow truck enters from Shirokaya to 4th Lane, turns around and parks at the edge of the road. A minute later, Dasha turns here and goes to the Pyatarokshka. At 15:37, she returns, walks past the car. The tow truck starts, sneaks behind, overtakes the girl, and turns onto Shirokaya. The child walks the same way. In the area of this intersection, there are always many children. Opposite the pharmacy is a playground. A little further away is an elementary school. And the children walk around the village calmly by themselves. All are locals. All know each other, say the locals. On Friday, when everything happened, the tow truck was seen in this place a few hours before Dasha disappeared. The recordings from the cameras show how it circled the area like a shark. It parks, then moves to another place, or just drives around. But that day, no one called the tow truck to Ol'ginskaya, so its owner will say. Around 1:30 p.m., he met me on the road. He stood across, blocked the passage opposite the auto parts store, recalls Tatiana. This rusty tow truck was hard to miss. I carefully drove around it. I thought strange. Where did he come from? What is he doing here at all? Children's playground opposite the pharmacy. From the pharmacy, relatives rushed to look at the recordings from the cameras at the neighbors. On one, they saw that the child was already sitting in the cabin of the tow truck. "We understood everything then," says Olga Sharnikova. "We called 112, threw information into the Ol'ginskaya telegram group, informed parents, classmates. The police came to the tow truck driver. There were already people there. They started to shake him. And I didn't do anything. I didn't take her. I drove and dropped off. Then I handed her over to someone. This saved him. If he had confessed immediately, there would have been a lynching." On the night of May 18th, the 25-year-old tow truck driver Ruslan Shingari confessed to the murder of Dasha. Tracked down by GLONASS, Eduard Gasparov drove up to the house when a neighbor came up and asked if he had seen Dasha, a girl living nearby. The man got behind the wheel and went to comb the streets. Not finding the child, he returned home and sat down to view the recordings from the cameras installed on his house. At 15:30, the child walked past to the store. After 16 minutes, the tow truck drove by. I stopped the recording, zoomed in, saw that the child was sitting in the car. We went to look for her, we didn't find her. The recording shows that the girl is sitting in the cabin. Then Edward called the number indicated on the door of the tow truck and asked for the driver's contacts. He called the driver, found out where he was, it turned out, in the neighboring settlement of Dorozhny. Edward dropped the address in the group and went there himself. Edward Gasparov found out who was driving the tow truck and where he lives. Another local, Dmitry Gaiko, was at home at that time. He didn't read the group and didn't know about the search. The man went out the gate when his friend drove up. "Are you going too?" "Where?" Dmitry didn't understand at first. Learning about the disappearance of an 8-year-old girl, the man called his father. They got in the car and went to look for Dasha. On the way, they already saw a photo of the tow truck and the driver's address. At the tow truck driver's house, Gaiko was the first to arrive. The tow truck driver, Ruslan, met the men. He was remarkably calm. Before that, he explained to them how to get there. He led them to his own house. At first, Ruslan pretended not to understand what child they were talking about. He said that he hadn't driven anywhere and hadn't picked up anyone. Edward and I crawled under the car. The engine was warm. The gearbox was warm. He didn't confess until we showed him the photo where the girl is sitting in the tow truck. Then he said that he put her in the car on Shirokaya, drove to the end of the street, and dropped her off, Dmitry recalls. Dmitry Gaiko was one of the first to arrive in Dorozhny. He said that a Vaz 2107 cut him off, even dictated the license plate numbers, says Edward. Allegedly, he chased after it, noticed the child, stopped and asked if the girl had seen where the car had gone. And supposedly the child said, "I saw. Let me show you." She got in the car. The Vaz seemed to have driven off into the field. He says, "I stopped. The child got out at the end of the street, and I drove on." After that, the men tried to push Ruslan into the car and take him away so that he could show the place where he had dropped off Dasha. Shingairi's mother ran out, started throwing a fit, cursing. Edward thought that the woman suspiciously exchanged glances with her son at that moment. This alarmed him, and he asked the guys to inspect everything, both the house and the yard, but they didn't find the girl. By the end of the search, the police arrived and took Ruslan away. The men who remained at his house began to think about where to look for the child next. Dmitry called the owner of the tow truck, who provided the GLONASS movement data. It turned out that in the last few hours, the car had only one long stop at the forest strip under Ol'ginskaya. There, the tow truck stood for 21 minutes and then drove home without stopping. People rushed into the fields. Who knows? She might still be alive. We started looking for the child, says Edward. We lined up in a chain and started combing the field. At the end of the field, a strip of forest began. The guy walking ahead of me went into this strip of forest and started shouting that the child was there. We ran up and saw the body. We walked through the planting once, walked through it a second time, found nothing, Dmitry recalls. Many went to the field to search. There was nothing in the field. It started to get dark. We decided to go through the planting again with the whole crowd, and right at the end, in the burdocks, in the bushes, Oleg Pakin found her. There seemed to be a bag on her head. I just couldn't look. The girl was dressed, her hands tied behind her back with ties, a black bag on her head. She was suffocated. Dasha was lying on her back, her legs bent, her clothes absolutely clean. During the search, the security forces combed through another area. Ruslan told them during the interrogation that he had handed Dasha over to some people. So they were looking for a gray foreign car, which these people were supposedly driving. But 5 minutes after the news of the found body, the police, investigators, and National Guard arrived at the strip of forest. In total, about 300 people were looking for Dasha. These were relatives, residents of Ol'ginskaya and neighboring settlements, taxi drivers, security forces, and officials. The search self-organized 15 minutes after the relatives of the missing girl asked for help in the village chat. Locals about Ruslan on Friday evening. It was noisy on Zelenaya Street in Dorozhny. It seemed that the whole neighboring Ol'ginskaya had gathered at one of the houses. A crowd rushed into the yard. The police arrived. People were buzzing. 70-year-old Lyudmila name changed. Ed, note, living next door, did not know the latest news, so she did not understand what the noise was connected with. But when she found out, she couldn't sleep all night. She heard how everyone dispersed and how a tractor came at night to take away that very tow truck. The woman says that for the next 2 days, law enforcement officers guarded the street, fearing retribution and riots. She retells a Saturday conversation with an official who arrived at the scene. "Don't wander around, go into the houses," the official warned. "If more than 2 cars start to gather, call the head of the administration. And if suddenly there will be shooting." Shooting? Who? What are you talking about? The residents were taken aback. So that no one gets hit by a ricochet. Lyudmila says that in the first days after the tragedy, it seemed that there was no one in the settlement. The streets were deserted. But gradually Dorozhny began to come to life. Only the house that the Shingairis rented remained empty. "There's no one. I haven't seen anyone these days. On the first day, a red car was parked inside, but after lunch, it was gone, and the light was off. The light came on in the evening, but the car was gone. Now the light turns on and off. Maybe someone familiar is walking around," says the neighbor. This house was rented by the Shingairi family. For the last 2 years, the Shingairi family are locals, Sovhas. Ruslan's mother was born and raised in Dorozhny. She comes from a large family, and she herself has 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. Ruslan is the eldest. The family lived on Zelenaya Street. Then the house burned down, and the Shingairis began to move from place to place. They lived in Ol'ginskaya, then in Makhina, then somewhere else. 2 years ago, they returned to Dorozhny and rented a house again on Zelenaya, opposite their burnt house. According to Lyudmila, the older Shingairis always drank. But Ruslan, whom she knew from childhood, she describes as a golden boy. His sister was about 5 years old, and he was about 10. And when the mother would go to work to milk, he would gather his sister, prepare food, and feed her. He was like a mother. He loved and helped his mother, was attached to his mother. I couldn't say anything bad about him until this happened. Now let them figure it out. The reviews of other people who knew Shingairi are contradictory and not so flattering. Most often, he is characterized by the words neutral and loser. Most of those who know Ruslan admitted they are surprised that he was capable of such a thing, but they have no doubt that the killer is him. Here are the comments of different residents of Dorozhny and Ol'ginskaya. "Well, he's just like that." "Well, a loser. Excuse me." "At school, he was not so good. For example, he sniffed sneakers in the locker room." A very interesting guy, quiet, neutral. Somehow we didn't even think that he could do something like this because at school he was a loser. No one even touched him. He didn't touch anyone. He was neutral from childhood. He was not evil. There were no acts of violence from him against anyone. He was disadvantaged. His parents were drinkers. At school he always smelled bad. No one communicated with him. Most likely he also had some kind of childhood trauma. In this yard, there used to be the Shingairy's house, which burned down many years ago. Ruslan spent the 8th and 9th grades in the Ol'ginskaya school. Victoria, who was studying with him in the same class at the time, remembers Shingairi as a non-communicative and conflict-prone teenager. He was a very poor student. He studied for 2 years. Either he was expelled or he just disappeared from sight. He was constantly trying to get into some fights. In general, the boy was downtrodden, aggressive. He was constantly snapping even at teachers. He tried to provoke the boys into a conflict. In one word, wayward. At the age of 18, Ruslan went to the army, signed one contract, then another. He worked there as a driver. Then a special operation began, and the guy ended up on the front line. In his first year, he ended up in the special operation zone. He disappeared. They were looking for him. They thought he was killed or taken prisoner. Then he was found after 3 months. He broke the contract, says Lyudmila. How he managed to do this and return home, the woman does not know, but other neighbors, referring to Ruslan himself, claim that he ran away. His contract ended, says a friend of Shingairi. They were supposed to go to Lugansk for regrouping. Their car was beaten up. It became non-working. He dropped everything and walked to the Lugansk region, where to fight and where he is. All this is far from each other, maximally different. Having returned from the special operations zone, Ruslan started living with his parents and 14-year-old brother on Zelenaya. He got a job as a tow truck driver. On May 18th, Ruslan Shingairi was brought to Ol'ginskaya under the protection of law enforcement officers for an investigative experiment. The locals gathered. They would have torn him apart here, describes the events Olga Sharnikova. He was walking in shackles. He was guarded with dogs. Everything was blocked off. People ran up, shouted, insulted him. If only to throw a stone, but the police officers are standing, and it's too far to throw. The death penalty should be brought back. To execute such scum pedophiles and those who steal and kill children. The woman admits that now it is scary to let children out of the house. On Monday, Olga's 15-year-old daughter refused to go to school. The mother did not insist. Moreover, people are afraid that Ruslan was not acting alone. Locals say that it's now scary to let children out of the house. Dasha had a cell phone, which has not been found to this day. When they just started looking for her, the device was turned off. But in the evening it turned on. They tracked it by geolocation in the Ostrovsky farmstead. Part of the search group went to the address. They ran into the house. There was some guy. Scared people. They searched everything. Neither the phone nor the girl was found. I think Ruslan is not telling something, says Olga. That's why everyone is afraid that there was someone else. We fear that it could have been recruits, like in Crocus. Maybe he's like that too? He was there, in Ukraine. And what was he doing there? Who was he communicating with? Maybe that's why he will take the blame only on himself. What does he have to lose? The day after the tragedy, the residents of Ol'ginskaya discussed the issue of security. The guys gathered, talked. They agreed to decide with a cool head starting from Monday. We have had a voluntary people squad for many years now. After this tragedy, people formed a group and raised the question of how volunteers can participate in maintaining public order, says the head of the administration of the Ol'ginskaya rural settlement, Alexander Karsiev. There are about 1,000 people in the group from Ol'ginskaya, Verkopodpolnoye, Istominskoye, and Lenin rural settlements. The four heads of administrations arrived on Saturday at 6:30, held a meeting. At this meeting, it was decided that the initiative group will take all our documents, get acquainted with them. Get acquainted with the powers of the People's Squad, with what it represents. Then we will decide on patrol routes. According to the head of the local administration, they are now deciding how the squad will work. On May 19th, the Aksai District Court arrested Ruslan Shingiri for 2 months. On the same day, Dasha was buried. Hundreds of people came to say goodbye to the girl. There was no end in sight. People came from Rostov, Aksai, Bataysk, both acquaintances and strangers. The district administration paid for the cafe, and local officials offered, if you need anything, we are ready to help. In the evening after the funeral, Olga went to see Anna and Vasily. They were sitting at home alone. I'll just look to see if everything is okay, and then I'll leave, Olga said, not wanting to disturb the couple. No, stay. Come in, Anna asked. The couple's life was divided into before and after. Dasha was a long-awaited child. The couple had a son, and then Anna couldn't get pregnant for 17 years. They prayed for a girl, went to St. Matrona, wrote notes, but after a while they gave up. And once the woman had a stomach ache. They went to the doctor. It turned out she was pregnant. On the ultrasound, the doctor told Anna, she is so quiet with you. She was a long-awaited child. She was quiet, calm. Olga recalls the girl. Anya says she came as a gift. As she appeared, so she left. And how to live now? I don't know. Dasha said, Mom, why are you guarding me so much? Let go. I'm already big. You can see on the camera she is walking happily on the sidewalk, skipping. The child went towards death. People have been transferring money to Dasha's parents since Saturday. Some pass it through relatives and friends, some bring it in person. God willing, they will come in a week, and in a month, and in a month, and in a year. At least they will bring 500 rubles, a loaf of bread, cookies, because I don't know how Anya will work, how Vasya, says Olga. And Anna thanks. So many people. I've never seen them in my life. They all come, support. It's a little easier for us that we are not alone.